You just met someone. They told you their name. You smiled, you nodded, you repeated it back to them. And 30 seconds later, it is completely gone. Not fuzzy, not half remembered. Gone. You can describe exactly what they looked like, the way they tilted their head, the color of their jacket, the particular way they laughed. But the name? It is as if it was never there at all. And the harder you try to retrieve it, the further it seems to slip. This happens to almost everyone, and most people assume it means something is wrong with them. Bad memory, getting older, not paying enough attention. But the real reason your brain forgets names so easily has nothing to do with any of that. It is something far more fundamental, a feature of how your memory was built, not a flaw in how you are using it. Your brain does not treat names the way it treats everything else. And once you understand why, the whole experience of forgetting a name will never feel the same again. Memory researchers call it the Baker-Baker paradox, and it is one of the most striking demonstrations of how names occupy a completely unique and uniquely fragile position inside your brain. Here is how it works. Tell two different people the same piece of information. Tell the first person that a man in a photograph is a baker, that baking bread is what he does for a living. Tell the second person that the same man's last name is Baker. A few days later, ask both people what they remember. The person who learned the occupation remembers it. The person who learned the name almost never does. Same word, same face, same amount of time, completely different outcome. Psychologist Gillian Cohen at the University of Oxford studied this phenomenon in the 1990s and identified what makes names so uniquely difficult for the brain to hold on to. It comes down to a concept called semantic richness. When you learn that someone is a baker, that single word connects to an enormous web of existing knowledge in your brain. The smell of bread, the image of an oven, the concept of flour and yeast and early mornings, every memory you have ever had that involves baking. The word baker lands inside your memory and immediately finds dozens of other things to attach itself to. It becomes part of a network. But when you learn that someone's last name is Baker, none of that happens. The name floats free. It connects to nothing. It is a label attached to a face, but that label has no meaning beyond the label itself. It is an arbitrary sound that your brain has no existing hooks to hang it on. And arbitrary sounds without hooks do not survive long in human memory. This is not an accident of design. To understand why your brain works this way, you have to go back to the environment it was built for. And that environment was not conference rooms and networking events. It was small groups, tight communities, and faces that you encountered again and again across an entire lifetime. Your ancestors lived in bands of roughly 50 to 150 people. Every person in that group was known to you deeply, not just by a name, but by their role, their relationship to you, their history of actions, their place in the social hierarchy. You did not need to remember that someone was called something. You needed to remember what they did, who they were loyal to, whether they had helped you before or betrayed someone else. Identity, in that world, was a dense web of behavioral and relational information, not a sound someone made when they were born. Names, as abstract, arbitrary labels, are a relatively recent invention in the long story of human social life. And your brain, a machine shaped over hundreds of thousands of years, has never fully adapted to treating them as important. Psychologist Daniel Schachter at Harvard University, who has spent decades studying the failures of human memory, describes name forgetting as one of the most common and most revealing memory errors people experience. In his research on what he calls the 7 sins of memory, Schachter identifies absent-mindedness and transience as two of the key reasons names fail to form strong memories in the first place. You hear a name at the moment of introduction, a moment almost always filled with social pressure, self-monitoring, handshakes, and the cognitive load of managing a first impression. And your brain simply does not encode it deeply enough to retrieve it later. Encoding is the first step, and it is where names almost always fail. Think about what is happening inside your brain when you meet someone new. Your prefrontal cortex is managing the social performance of the introduction. What to say, how to appear confident but warm, whether your handshake is too firm or too soft. Your amygdala is running a rapid threat and familiarity assessment. Is this person safe? Do I know them? How important are they to my social network? Your visual cortex is absorbing their face, their posture, their expression. Your auditory cortex hears their name. And somewhere in the middle of all of that activity, your hippocampus is supposed to be converting that name into a stable long-term memory. But the hippocampus does not work well under conditions of divided attention. Memory consolidation, the process of taking a fleeting experience and converting it into something retrievable, requires focus. It requires that the brain assign meaning and importance to what it is receiving. And in the noisy, socially demanding context of an introduction, your brain is doing 10 things at once. The name arrives at the worst possible moment for remembering anything. This is why you can walk away from a conversation and perfectly reconstruct what was said, what was felt, what the other person was wearing, and have absolutely no access to the 2 syllables that were spoken in the first 5 seconds. There is another layer to this that goes even deeper. Neuroscientist Patricia Reuter-Lawrence at the University of Michigan has studied how the brain processes proper nouns, names, compared to common nouns, and found that they activate a narrower, less distributed set of neural regions. When you hear a common noun like doctor or teacher or athlete, your brain lights up across multiple regions, language areas, visual areas, memory areas connected to your prior experience with those roles. When you hear a proper noun, a name, the activation is more localized, less reinforced, and far easier for competing information to overwrite. The brain literally encodes names differently, and the way it encodes them makes them inherently more fragile. What about the tip of the tongue phenomenon? That maddening state where you know someone's name. You can feel it sitting right at the edge of your mind, but you cannot quite reach it. Psychologists call this the TOT state, and it reveals something fascinating about how name retrieval works. Research by Deborah Burke at Pomona College has shown that tip-of-the-tongue states happen far more often with names than with any other category of word. And they happen because names are stored in a different way from the information they are connected to. You might be able to remember everything about a person, their face, their job, their personality, where you met them, mutual friends you share, and still be completely unable to retrieve their name. Because the name is stored separately in a different part of the memory network, connected to the rest by a link that is often thin and poorly reinforced. Everything else about the person is richly encoded. The name hangs by a thread, and threads break easily. There is something quietly profound in all of this, because it means that forgetting someone's name is not a sign that you do not care about them, or that you were not paying attention, or that your memory is failing. It means your brain is working exactly the way it was designed to work. It is prioritizing meaning over labels. It is retaining what a person is over what they are called. It is doing what human brains have always done, building a rich, multi-layered representation of the people in your world and treating the arbitrary sound attached to that representation as the least important piece of information to hold. The people who seem to effortlessly remember names, the ones at parties who greet everyone by name 20 minutes after being introduced, are not people with better memories. They are people who have learned, consciously or not, to do the one thing that fights the brain's natural architecture. They create meaning where none exists. They associate the name with something already in their memory. They visualize it. They repeat it deliberately in the conversation. They build, artificially, the semantic hooks that the brain needs to make a label stick. They are not remembering. They are encoding differently. And that distinction matters. Because it means name forgetting is not a fixed feature of who you are. It is a consequence of how encoding happens, and encoding can be changed. The next time you meet someone, saying their name once more during the conversation is not just polite. It is giving your hippocampus a second chance to consolidate what it almost certainly missed the first time. The name is not stored in your memory because your memory did not think it was worth storing. Give it a reason to change its mind. You just met someone. They told you their name. You smiled, you nodded, you repeated it back to them. This time, you know exactly what your brain is doing with it.